as though the child is like a little puppet that goes out into the world, and the mom still animates them and does everything for them. No, people are independent. They're independent adults, and they make their own decisions. And sometimes that can be really hard. So in one case, you were talking about anecdotal evidence of how people solve the issue. There was a woman who was a Reformed Jewish educator and ran a synagogue school in the Chicago area, and her daughter decided to raise her children as Christians. And she worked out an agreement with the daughter that it was okay to expose the children to Jewish ethical perspectives, and she founded her own charitable group for grandparents and grandchildren to do mitzvot together, and this is how she reaches out to the grandchildren. She exposes them to Jewish culture and to her values, which, as you know, overlap with Christian values, so it's not like a normal thing for the mother, and this is how she deals with it. Because if she says, if you do this, I won't talk to you anymore, then she doesn't have grandchildren. And we've had people come to, we always have these nudniks who come to, it's on the web, you know. They come to the site, they tell people, you did it wrong, that's why your child intermarried, and you should cut them off. I'm like, what's wrong with you? You know, I read these things, they come into my inbox in the morning and I'm like, oh, another one, you know? Because, what are you talking about? These are people's families. It's not like you get married and it's happily ever after. Our view of marriage in the Jewish community is very like Cinderella, you know, like the end of a movie. They go off into the sunset, right? You find someone Jewish and then everyone is Jewish and everything's hunky-dory. Well, actually, you find someone who's Jewish or not Jewish, and then you're married and you have children and you have to raise them as Jews, if you're going to do that, whether your partner is Jewish or not. And you have to negotiate the same stuff. It's not, you know, marriage is not the end of the movie and then the curtain comes down and everything's over and we go home. You keep going. So, I mean, I feel like there's a certain way that people have to actually cope with some difficult stuff. Just, you know.
I'm actually in Interfaith marriage, I'm Jewish, and it's not here, but as our approach is that we approach each other's religion with very much respect, and because we researched each other's religions, I think it's an easier time understanding Judaism, salvation, Christianity. The problem that I'm having is, what about when I have questions about Christianity? I don't feel comfortable walking into church and tackling the pastor and saying, hey, let me sit down with you for half an hour and explain me all these things that are mystery. I mean, did you have any recommendations about how I can do that? You know, again, without having to seek out.
I'm gonna have to get your email address because I don't have my Christian learning, but I do have a friend who's a nun. See, because it's called Interfaith Family, people get confused, they think it's Interfaith Dialogue. So I have this friend who's a nun who found me because our website's called Interfaith, and she'll know. I'll get you some stuff from her. Sure, I'll know what I'm saying. I'll put you in touch with her. She's really nice. Well, we do have a lot of stuff on the discussion boards about Christianity, learning about Christianity. I should probably just, this is not, I anticipated the question about the Christmas trees, about Israel, rabbinic officiation, but not my Christian learning. So I'm going to have to get, you want to take my business card? Yeah, so we can, and then I will actually, maybe I can get somebody to write an article. We have a priest who we're friends with who has written for the site about Catholicism, but we haven't had that much. I don't know which denomination of Christianity we're talking about, but yeah, it's definitely worth learning about. It's interesting. We did for a while have someone who was doing that. We were taking like Dear Abby-like letters, but they kind of fizzled out because people were more comfortable coming to the site and just prowling around and looking instead of having their questions answered specifically. And also, you know, for a lot of people, they want to have somebody who's their spiritual leader and their person to answer questions in person. Like you're asking me now, you could have asked me online, but here I am. So anyway, I feel like I'm cuter online. Anyway, I was going to talk about, I was going to talk about some other approaches that were effective, but I don't want to totally go away from it. So let's come back to this question, because I mean, I think with the, there's a certain way that when I gave this talk this morning with rabbis, they were talking about how children in interfaith marriages want to explore the heritage of the non-Jewish parent after they've been raised Jewish and vice versa. And I feel like it's really important to figure out ways to integrate the cultural part of the non-Jewish partner's background fully, so that the child doesn't feel like, and now I have to also find out everything about their religion. Well, it's not that they shouldn't find out about it, but do you know what I'm saying? Find out about it, not how to do it. I'm still kind of, when people come to the site and say, well, we're going to do it this way, and we know you don't approve, I'm like, you're right, we don't approve, but I want you to be able to talk about what you're doing here, because I don't really want to shut down dialogue. So I want to be like open about the fact that I'm really rooting for everybody to have Jewish kids and have the kids be really happy, and and feel comfortable speaking Italian or whatever the other side has. So this brings me to bar and bat mitzvah involvement. I talked a little bit about Tat Shabbat and helping moms in interfaith families. There's also the grandparent circle group for helping grandparents dealing with things. When the child becomes bar bat mitzvah, that's a really fantastic experience for the kid. And everyone in the Jewish community knows all about bar and bat mitzvah. The non-Jewish relatives may not know anything about it, and so they may not have an expectation that they're going to be included. But the Jewish relatives often want to have the non-Jewish parent honored in the bar and bat mitzvah. So that's a challenge for some congregations, because in some congregations they don't really even let the non-Jews touch the Torah, because that's a custom in the Jewish community. Or there may be halakhic reasons not to include, Jewish legal reasons not to include Jewish partners, non-Jewish partners in certain ways. So synagogues have to think well about what works with their particular theology to be inclusive of the non-Jewish partner. And you're talking about what are the success stories. I had one non-Jewish dad writing about how his son's bar mitzvah was a turning point for him as a spiritual person, because he had rejected Catholicism in his youth. And this was like this awesome experience, and he was so proud, it was so great. And also that his parents, who he thought would be very disappointed, because they'd been very disappointed when he said he wasn't Catholic, his parents were delighted. They were like so proud because their grandchild was doing this great thing. So there was a way that the families were able to bond over the Jewish practice, even though the non-Jewish relatives, it wasn't their thing, but they still could have the experience of pride in the kid. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was trips to Israel. Now there was a study that came out recently that suggested that interfaith marriage might be one of the reasons for the waning commitment of younger Jews to Israel. And I'm not sure that that's actually accurate. What we found is that when interfaith couples have opportunities to go to Israel together, that both the Jewish and the non-Jewish spouse are likely to come away with positive feelings about Israel. And so they've been doing a series of trips from Atlanta, and this has been a way to reach people. Also, when children of interfaith marriage go on Birthright Israel, they usually come back having had relatively positive experiences, even if they're Jewish by the patrilineal descent rule and not by matrilineal descent. They often come away feeling positive. So again, it's the same solution as you have for people in same-faith families, that exposure and more information can give people this opportunity. We know that Israel can be an issue between interfaith couples, but it's obviously, to me, a less live issue for most couples than whether you have a Christmas tree or a bris.